The project shown in this video can be found in the textbook Technical Drawing 101 with AutoCAD, available from SDC Publications. Well, in this video I'm going to show you how to add dimensions to the shaft guide, which is in Chapter 5 of your text. I went through and I counted 13 dimensions in one note. That note tells us what the material is, which in this case is cast iron. So what I would do is I would want to add that down into the notes section to take care that the material is cast iron. All the other dimensions will be placed on the views. So what I'm going to be looking for as I place dimensions is profile views, and also I want to pay attention to the ASME settings for spacing and style and that sort of thing. To start, I'm going to pick on the Annotate tab, and then you will see a panel here named Dimensions, and there is an arrow right here that points down that says Dimensions, Dimension Style. If you pick on that, you'll be taken to the Dimension Style Manager. Now you can also open this by going to your Dimension toolbar if you have it open and picking on the bottom icon right over here. Alright, so I've already made a new dimension style named ASME Small Radii, and I've also made one named ASME Large Radii. And just to show you the settings that are in the small radii, I'm going to highlight small radii and I'm going to pick Modify. And if I start with the Lines tab and I look at the settings I've put in, for my baseline settings I have 10 millimeters, and under my setting for Extend Beyond Dimension Lines I have 3, and under Offset from Origin I have 1.5, and the others I think were all just the default settings. Next we're going to pick on Symbols and Arrows. I have close filled arrows for my first and second arrowhead, and then also I have close filled leaders. The arrow size will be 3. Under center marks I have line checked, and I have 2 set for the size of the center mark. That would be the mark right in here. Remember, everything here is in millimeters. Under my dimension break I have that set to 3 millimeters. I have preceding dimension text checked on the radio button. 45 for my jog angle and 1.5 for my linear jog dimension, neither of which I think is going to affect us on this drawing. I'm going to pick on the Text tab, and what I want here is my text style should be standard. And just a reminder, in standard we assigned Arial to be our font. For the text height, that will be 3 millimeters. Fraction height scale is at 1, but I think that's just I think that's grayed out. There's nothing we can do about that anyway. Our text placement, we want centered on the vertical. On horizontal we want centered. We want the view direction, we want this to read left to right. Text alignment should be horizontal. And I think that's the only thing we need to check on this one. Even though this is a metric drawing, we're not going to check the ISO standard because even though we're doing this in millimeters, we're still using the ASME dimensioning standard. I'm going to pick on the Fit tab, and remember this is the small radii style, so I'm going to select both text and arrows beside the dimension line. On this one we have a use overall scale of 1, and then I'm going to check the top box here on Place Text Manually. On primary units I will have unit format at decimal, the precision at 1 decimal place, so it's going to be 0.0. Round off is 0, scale factor is 1. Under 0 suppression, because this is a metric drawing, I want to suppress the trailing 0, so I'm going to put a check in that box right there. This is for trailing zeros on angles. I can have that on there, it won't hurt anything. And let's just quickly look at alternate units. Alternate units should be off, so as long as this box is not checked, we won't be getting any alternate units. And if we pick on tolerances, our method should be set right up here to none. That way we don't have to worry about any of that. And we can pick OK. Now, I'd also already made a large radii style, so I'm going to modify it. Everything else in the large radii style, with the exception of the fit settings, the fit tab settings, which is text, beside the dimension line, overall scale of 1, but under fine tuning, both of these boxes will be checked for the large radii style. One other thing I want to check, though, I'm going to pick on primary units. Under zero suppression, trailing zeros should be suppressed. I'm going to pick OK. And I'm going to pick on small radii and set current, and then pick close. Okay. Next thing I want to do is go back to my home tab, and I want to check and see what layer I'm on, and I'm going to check this and pick down. I want to go to the dimensions layer and place all my dimensions on the dimensions layer, and now I believe I'm ready to start dimensioning. So as I was saying, there are 14 dimensions in total, and one of the first dimensions I want to put on here would be the height of this edge right here. And so a good way to do that would be just using linear dimension, which is right over here at the top of the toolbar. You pick on that, or you can pick it right here in the panel for annotation, and pick on that, and it says where's the first extension line orientation. I have endpoint on. I'm going to pick there. I'm going to pick here. I want to move out, and I want the 12.7 to be centered in there, and I'm going to move out and just pick a point. All right. Now, there is a rule about how far out we need to be for this first arrowhead, and that rule is we need to be about 10 millimeters out. So one way to check that is to use the offset command. So I'm going to pick on offset, and when it asks for the offset distance, I'm going to type 10 and press enter. Then I'm going to pick the edge of this guy here and pick outside of it. Now, because that was drawn as a rectangle, it offset the entire rectangle, but still the distance between this line and this line is 10 millimeters. So I'm going to pick on my dimension, and you can see those blue grips. I'm going to pick and hold on that with my left button, and I'm going to come right over here, and I'm going to line up right there on that and pick. Well, I'm going to try to anyway. Pick right there and get that lined up. Now it looked like maybe my midpoint object snap is not on, so I'm going to come over here and pick on this and make sure that, yeah, midpoint was not turned on. I think I'll turn on quadrant, and that should be good right there. Okay, so now this rectangle that I offset, and in your case it may have just been a line, we can delete now because that was just used to locate that first dimension. So what I would do at this point is take a highlighter and mark 12.7 off my list of dimensions by looking at the sketch and finding that one and marking it off. All right. Now another dimension that we need is the dimension from this edge here to the center of this hole. So again, I'm going to use a linear dimension to do this, and this time I'm going to pick right at the end point of that arrow right there. And I'm going to come right up here, and I'm going to go into the quadrant of that larger circle that you see right there. I'm going to pick right there, and I want to pick this. I can place it anywhere I want in here. The dimension is supposed to be 63.5. I'm going to pick right there and press escape. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that. I'm going to pick on this grip and drag it over until it snaps to the end of that arrowhead right there and pick. So I'm going to undo that and show you again what I just did. So here's my 6.3. I would like this arrow, this 63.5, sorry. What I would like is this arrow to line up with that arrow. So I'm going to pick on this dimension. I'm going to pick at the end of that arrow and hold down with my left click button and drag it over, and when it snaps to the end of that arrow, I'm going to pick and then press escape. And that perfectly lines up those two dimensions, and at that point I would take my highlighter and I would highlight that dimension. So now I'm down to needing only 12 dimensions. And my next dimension, I would also use a linear dimension. This time I'm going to snap at this corner here, and I'm going to come to this quadrant right here, and I'm going to move into this area right in here. And what I want to do is come up about 10 millimeters from the top of this. Now I have something I can look at right down here and see about how far 10 millimeters is. So I can get a pretty good idea of about where to place that 50.8 so that it will be at least 10 millimeters out from my part. At that point, I would highlight that dimension. The next dimension we need is a diameter dimension for the diameter of this hole right here. So if you look on your dimension toolbar, you have a tool right here called diameter. Pick on diameter, just pick on the edge of that circle, move out, and kind of pay attention to where you're placing it. You want to make sure that it's all clear. And one thing I might do is even just line it up with that 50.8, but move it out here to the side and pick. All right. Then I'm going to highlight that guy. And I have one more dimension that I'm going to put on the front view. And remember, what I've been doing is looking for profile views. And I also want to follow what the designer gave us. And so I'm going to put one last linear dimension on this. I'm going to pick on linear. I'm going to snap to that corner and snap to this corner here. And I'm going to move down. And again, I want to move down 10 millimeters. Now, I'm just going to kind of look at the other 10 millimeters that I offset over here and match that as best I can. If I want to get real careful about it, I would offset this line 10 millimeters and line those up exactly. And maybe later I'll come back and fine tune it and make sure that that's what I have. So I'm now going to highlight that 10.8. Now we're going to move up and look at the top view. And we're looking again for profile views. And the first profile view I see, I'm going to use a linear dimension. I'm going to pick at this endpoint, pick at this endpoint. I'm going to move out in this direction here, and I want to come out 10 millimeters. And I'll show you a way you can come down here and you can just park at the end of that arrowhead right there, and that's going to give you a polar tracking line that hopefully you can follow. Let me go back and grab that guy again, and I'm going to follow that. And I'm going to place this new dimension right in line with that dotted line. Okay, so that guy should be lined up exactly with this one down here and be in the right position. Now, the next dimension I want to do is called a baseline dimension, and I want it to come out about 10 millimeters from this guy. And so here's what I did. I just used a linear dimension to place this. So for my next dimension, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to use the baseline option. I'm going to pick on baseline, and it's going to pick up right where that first dimension or that last dimension began, and all I need to come down here and do is pick at the end point of this line right here and pick. And then I'm going to press escape. Now, when we were doing our settings a minute ago for our dimension style, we set the baseline spacing to 10 millimeters, so that automatically spaced that 10 millimeters right there. Alright, so both of those dimensions I can go in and highlight. The next dimension I want to place in here is going to be an angular dimension. So I'll come over here to my dimension toolbar and find angular. And on this one I'm going to pick the vertical line, and then I'm going to pick the angled line. And I'm going to move below my view down into this area right in here and pick. And again, I want this distance in here to be about 10 millimeters out from there. So that's where my 45 is going to go. I'm going to highlight that one because I've got it in there. My next dimension is going to be another diameter dimension. And I'm going to pick on the edge of this circle and move down into this area here and pick for that one. Now, I also need to put a dimension in for this radius that I have right here. So I'm going to go over to my toolbar, and in here I have a radius option, that tool right there. I'm going to pick on radius, and I'm going to pick this large radius right here. I'm going to move down into this area. I might kind of line that up with that 45 or something and get it in that position right there and pick. Now I'm going to press escape to get out of anything that I was in. I want to show you something. If I go to the annotate tab right up here, if you pick on that, and then you come down here and you pick on one of your dimensions like that R19, and look right here, it will tell you what the dimension style is for that dimension. And on this dimension I want to change it to the large radii style. So I'm going to pick on the down arrow here, and I'm going to pick ASME large radii. And when I do that, I want you to watch what happens to this arrow right here. You see when I pick on large radii style, how it changes. So I'm going to pick right there. And what it does is it extended the leader and it put the arrowhead pointing out on that guy. And that's what I want. So this is the difference between a small radii style and a large radii style. I'm going to highlight both of those. And at that point, I have all the dimensions that I want to place on the top view. And now I'm going to come focus over here on the right side view. I only have 3 dimensions left. The first dimension I'm going to place is going to be a linear dimension. And so if I go back to my home tab, for example, I can find linear right here. I'm going to pick at this point and at this point here. I'm going to come up, and if I want, I can come over here and just park at the end of that arrowhead and follow my object track line across. When I get right there in the center, I'm going to pick, and there's my overall width of the part. The next one I want to put on, I have a diameter over here for a cylinder. And a lot of beginners would make a mistake of going in here and going to the diameter symbol and putting a diameter symbol on there like that says diameter 38. But according to the ASME dimension style, we should not dimension cylinders like that. They should be dimensioned in their side view. So I'm going to pick that guy, press delete, take it out. And I'm going to show you where you should be placing that. I'm going to pick on linear dimension, and I'm going to snap to this endpoint and snap to this endpoint here. I want to move out at least 10. And so I'm just going to come in here and pick and then press escape. I'm going to use my offset, and remember it's already set to 10. That was the last time I used it, so I'm going to just press enter on that offset distance. I'm going to pick the visible line and move out to the side, press escape. And you can see that my extension line right here is coming out quite a ways. I'm going to move back in if I can with that guy. I think I have probably an object snap set on that. Let me come down here and turn my object snap setting off. Pick on that and move inside a little bit and pick. And if you recall, whenever we extend center lines out, we want them to come at least 0.25 inches. But the equivalent of 0.25 inches in a decimal drawing, or I'm sorry, in a millimeter drawing or metric drawing, is 6 millimeters. So as long as that extends out 6 millimeters, we're good. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick on this guy, and you can see that grip right there. I'm going to drag it over until it snaps onto my line right here. Actually, I've got to turn object snap back on for that to work. I'm going to snap it onto there and pick, press escape. Then I'm going to go inside. I can see that red line. That was my offset line. I'm going to delete that line out of there. Now, when I look at this guy here, I can see that I've lost my dash in that center line. And the reason why that's happening is my line type scale needs to be adjusted just a little bit. And the way you do that is type LTS for line type scale, and press enter or pick right there. And it says enter a new line type scale, and for some reason my current line type scale is set to 20, so I'm going to try 15 and see if anything happens. Well, I don't see anything on that one, so I'm going to see, let's see, it's actually set to 0.15. Let me do an undo. I just want to see what that was set to originally, just make sure I didn't misread that. LTS and enter. Okay, yeah, it does say it's 20. So I'm going to type 15, not 0.15. There it goes. That actually worked. Now you can see that this center line right here is still kind of crowding things. I'm going to pick on that and drag this dimension up and pick. Well, got to turn object snap off. Sorry about that, because it wants to snap back to the midpoint, and pick right there. Now I can go in there and delete that construction line out. And so there's where my 38.1 is going to be located. It won't be crowding my center line so much. So I'm going to highlight the 25.4 and the 38.1. And the last dimension I'm going to place is one that our designer didn't give us. And it's the overall height of the part. And so we have the overall depth of the part, we have the overall width of the part, but we don't know the overall height And the truth is, with all the dimensions that the designer gave us, we don't have to know the overall height of the part. So it's sort of an extra dimension if we include it. So we're going to have to treat it a little bit differently. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick linear dimension, and I'm going to snap at that endpoint right there. Now remember, I've got to turn object snap on again so I can snap to that endpoint. I'm going to come up here and I can snap to the end of that arrow or to that line right there where the endpoint is, doesn't matter. I'm going to pick, and then I'm going to move into this area right in here. Now the thing is, this time I want to be 10 millimeters out from this edge right here. So I got a pretty good idea of how far 10 millimeters is by looking at the others, so I'm just going to pick like right there. And remember I said this is an extra dimension, and we don't want this dimension to be toleranced, or we don't want anybody to use this when they make the part. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in there and double click on it, and what's going to happen at that point is I can edit it, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a parentheses at the front and at the back of that. Let's see, that's supposed to be 95.3. And then close my parentheses. What that does is it turns that into what we call a reference dimension. Whenever a dimension is put in parentheses, it tells the person making this part that this is for reference only. It should not be used to manufacture the part. Now, there's one other thing I need to do. Remember this 38.1 that I put on this cylinder right here? Well, because this is a cylinder, that should be a diameter. So to add a diameter to that, here's what I want to do. I want to pick on it, actually double click on it. Come on. I'll get it, don't worry. I don't know why I'm getting this change the speller, but okay. All right. Now you can see there's my cursor is blinking right in front of that .38, and so, but also because I double clicked on text, it threw me into the text editor and up here on my ribbon. So I'm going to come up here where it says ribbon. I'm going to pick on that down arrow right there, and I'm going to pick the word diameter. Now you can also get a diameter in there by typing %C, and what AutoCAD does, it sees those three characters, %C, and it converts them to a diameter symbol. Then I'm going to close my text editor. So now I have the diameter symbol. Now there's something that's kind of bothering me about my layout here, and what it is, it's this wide distance between these two dimensions, because up here I only have 10 millimeters between these two dimensions up here, and I like to be consistent with my spacing. So in spacing this only 10 millimeters off, I wound up with a wide dimension here, but I had to have 10 millimeters down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick on this dimension, and I'm going to pick right there at that grip in the middle of those dimension numbers, and I'm going to drag it out until I'm about 10 millimeters from the dimension that's 95.3, and press escape. Now I'm going to take my highlighter and I'm going to highlight the 95.3, and I think I've got everything highlighted now. I also need to go in and highlight my cast iron, and I'm going to look this over. I believe that's all the dimensions that I have. So at that point, of course, you would want to reach up here and save your drawing and make sure that you have what you need. And if you click on your layout tab down here in the lower left hand corner, you should be able to see your dimensions as they're going to appear when you print them out. Alright, so I'm going to go back and pick on the model tab. So now what I would want to do is just go in and carefully check all of my dimensions, make sure they're correct. Maybe go in and fine-tune the spacings and things so that they're exactly the settings that ASME says we should have. But for the most part, we're finished dimensioning the shaft guide.